Every Friday morning, my wife Shira calls her brother and sister-in-law, Ari and Tziporit, who live in Yerushalayim. Every Friday, it's a pre-Shabbos call. How are their kids doing? They have 3 kids at war now. 2 sons are in Gaza now, 10 months later. Their daughter-in-law is up north now, 10 months later. How are the grandkids? What are your plans for Shabbos? Etc. Thinking about you from Newton. And 2 weeks ago, that Friday morning call was doubly evocative. First, that week, Ari and Tziporit had been blessed with a new grandson, a new little baby boy. And the birth of any child is a joy and a miracle. This one felt particularly sweet because the boy's father alone had been serving up north for 8 months. So his wife was pregnant by herself for 8 months. He was up north because Hezbollah knows where our bases are and can target them. He was sleeping in the forest outside in winter for 8 months. He got home, and within 2 weeks, his son was born, their grandson was born. And in their community, the first Friday night after a boy is born is called a Shalom Zachor. And people come and they gather and they sing, and it's just a joyful moment. And so Ari and Tziporit were talking about what they're going to serve and who's going to come and the beautiful flowers, which we could see on FaceTime. And then she added, we're also prepping the bomb shelter downstairs. We're also making sure that there's plenty of water, making sure there's plenty of space, so that if the bombs start falling, and if the sirens start blaring, all the people who are here for our grandson simcha can go to the bomb shelter while the bombs fall. Planning for a simcha, celebrating joy and love and life, preparing for a bomb shelter for bombs from Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis at the same time. Thank God their Shalom Zachor went off without a bomb scare. It was just beautiful and blessed. But the very next week, I read this trenchant commentary by Danny Gordis about what he calls the new normalcy in Israel. And the new normalcy in Israel is how Israelis are getting used to unspeakable stuff. The new normalcy in Israel is embodied by what my brother and sister-in-law did. Get food, flowers, guests, and plenty of water in the bomb shelter, just in case. And they treat that as normal, and he raises a question about that. He writes, have we actually gotten used to thinking that it's normal that a country has to gird for an attack from another sovereign state sworn to its destruction, a likely second attack in less than 4 months? And then Danny quotes the motto that was universal and ubiquitous in Israel at the time of the war, B'yachad ninatzeach. Together we will win. Victory, we will win. B'yachad ninatzeach. And he writes, it's become sort of quaint these days, that phrase. Refer to it and people smile. Yeah, I remember the days when we actually thought that. This new Israel, the Israel hunkered down, waiting for Iran to attack us once again, is a very different country from the little engine that could Israel that many of us fell in love with years ago. Is this Israel, the Israel that can be attacked at will by foreign countries, leaving the Jewish state entirely dependent on the U.S. president, whoever she or he may be at the moment, to put together a coalition of countries to defend it? Is this the kind of Israel that our kids' generation is going to keep flocking back to? one would have to be very naive not to be worried about that. How do we think about Danny's critique? Here's my question for you. Is getting used to a bad thing, is getting used to a bad thing a good thing or a bad thing? Is getting used to a bad thing a good thing or a bad thing? Is getting used to a bad thing like the fact that Israeli 20-somethings and 30-somethings and 40-somethings are still at war in Gaza and up north 10 months later? Is that a good thing or bad thing to get used to it? Like the fact that Hezbollah continues daily to send missiles and drones, which at a minimum cause fire and damage and destroy towns and destroy forests, and have resulted in tens of thousands of Israelis in the north being mifunim, displaced internally, living 10 months later in hotels. And by the way, the school system in the north said there's not going to be school again in September, so year 2 of internally displaced begins now. It's getting used to that a good thing or a bad thing? And is the pit in Israeli stomachs and in ours, what is Hezbollah and Iran going to do, and when are they going to do it? Is getting used to it and planning a Shalom Zachor a good thing or a bad thing? How do we think about getting used to bad things? By the way, just side note, this is not only Israel's challenge, this is just a very human challenge. All of us, it is inevitable, it is part of the human condition. We're going to be stuck in a tough weather pattern in our lives. When it's hard and cold and sad and dark and challenged, and there are patterns that are not working, and there are patterns that are not serving us. Are we supposed to get used to it? If we get used to the bad and the hard and the sad, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or not? How do we think about that, both for Israel and for ourselves? So, Jewish tradition has 2 categories that help us think about the ups and downs of the Jewish story and the human story. The first, which is the category that all of us, 100% of us, 100% of Israelis, would pick off the menu, if we could pick it off the menu, is Geula, redemption. Redemption means we had a problem, but we solved it. Redemption means we had a problem, but we no longer do. Redemption means we had a problem, but it's now in the rearview mirror. Redemption, problem over, is the main category of Pesach, which after all celebrates Yetziat Mitzrayim, that we actually got out of Egypt. And Geula is the main category of the Pesach Seder. Somebody was asking me, why do I have a Haggadah now? They said, you're very early for Pesach. I said, no, I'm very late for Pesach. This is from the Pesach Seder, and this is the climax of Magid. Hotzianu, you took us out. Me'avdu lecherut, from slavery to freedom. Miyagon lesimcha, from despair to joy. Me'evel leyom tov, from suffering and mourning to festivity and holiday. Me'afela le'or gadol, from darkness to a great light. Mishibud le'geula, from subjugation and enslavement to redemption. V'nomar lafanav shira chadasha, hallelujah. Therefore, let's sing a new song to God, hallelujah. Geula is about a crisp, straight trajectory of redemption. Who wouldn't pick that? My sister and brother would pick that. Israelis would pick that. The hostages and their families would pick that. The soldiers would pick that. Any human would pick that. But happens when it's not on the menu. Sometimes you get geula and sometimes you don't. The moment of the Exodus, they got geula, but for 430 years, they didn't get geula. 1948, when Israel was founded, they had redemption. But for 2,000 years, no redemption. From 1941 to 1945, no redemption. So we need another category, because geula is fabulous, but it's just not always ours. Which leads us to today. Today is a special Shabbat called Shabbat Nachamu, which comes from chapter 40 of Isaiah, the Haftarah for today that Sid chanted so beautifully. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Comfort, oh comfort my people. So we chant it right after Tisha B'Av, after all the horrible stuff that happened. And Isaiah's message is, be comforted. So we have two categories. There is geula, which is redemption, and nachama, which is consolation. What's at the heart of consolation? And this is just so important. Here's the definition, the dictionary definition of consolation. Consolation is a balm for the unredeemed. Consolation is something that makes you feel better when you're feeling worse. Consolation is a word or deed that makes you feel better when you're in the middle of your sorrow, when your pain is not in the rearview mirror, when your pain is today. The redeemed get geula. The unredeemed get nachama. They get nachamu. And what is the heart of that consolation? So I've been thinking about this, and I've been reading and poring over and reading the commentaries on Isaiah chapter 40. Like, if you're feeling uncomforted, how do you get the comfort? I've been reading his Haftarah for a 3-point plan, but there's no 3-point plan, or a 5-point plan. There's no 5-point plan. How do you find comfort? So here's Isaiah's point, and it's simple, and it's a single point. And the good news is it's true. And you know this from your own lives. Here's Isaiah's point. Life can and does change quickly and dramatically. Life can change quickly and dramatically. And then the reality that you've been in, you're no longer in. Life can change quickly and dramatically. And then, as they say at Hartman, what used to be thought of as impossible seems now inevitable. That is the single thought of Isaiah. And that is the comfort, which is the reality that we're in now is hard and bad and sad and feels like forever. But life can change dramatically and quickly. And then you're in a different reality. And what was once thought to be impossible becomes inevitable. And the one thing you're supposed to do is not give up. Not give up in the meantime. Don't give up on getting married. Don't give up on having children. Don't give up on a Shalom Zachor or a Brit. Don't give up on life. Now here's the thing. The good news is Isaiah is right, and I'll prove it to you with an example from Israel and from our personal lives. Example from Israel. All of us here lived through, all of us here were alive for the Second Intifada from 2000 to 2005, which you'll remember is when homicide bombers would come into Israeli restaurants and explode themselves and kill everybody in the restaurant. And that happened for 5 years, and over 1,000 innocent Israelis were murdered in the Second Intifada. Every one of them is a tragedy, but the one that all these years later still sticks with me is the story of a father and daughter who went to Cafe Hillel in Jerusalem on the eve of her wedding. And there was a homicide bomber, and father and the bride-to-be were murdered on the eve of her wedding. And it turns out he was a doctor, and it turns out he worked in emergency rooms. He was an emergency room physician, and it turns out that at that emergency room, he treated whoever came into the emergency room. He had treated the terrorists. He had treated wounded terrorists, and he was murdered with his daughter on the eve of her wedding. That was the Second Intifada. And you think, we're just stuck here. It's never going to be different. And Isaiah 40 says, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, this will not last. Have faith, this will not last. And it did not last. And the Second Intifada was over, and Israel figured out a solution, and restaurants and cafes and Cafe Hillel are bustling and brimming again. Life can change dramatically and quickly. And I've seen this, and we have all seen this. If you think about it, everyone here has examples from your personal life. I'll just share with you one of a very close friend who was celebrating a major birthday, one with a 0 attached. And you know how birthdays can be very reflective, and birthdays can be very difficult if life is not going well. And birthdays can be especially difficult if it's a major birthday, one with a 0 attached and not going well. And I spent such a birthday with this friend. And the ground rule was, you can be with me, but don't talk to me about me. I don't want to talk about me. He didn't like his job. He didn't have a partner. He felt he was lost, aimless, wandering. He didn't think it was ever going to end. Be with me, don't talk to me about me. We did a nature hike, super sober, super somber, super silent, super sullen. It felt like it was going to last forever. But Isaiah's right. It doesn't last forever. Have faith. Sure enough, 1 month after this very somber, sad birthday, 1 month later, he met the love of his life. They have been together ever since. They're absolutely flourishing. They're living together now. He now has a job he loves. 1 year later to the day, he could not be happier. The good news is, what Isaiah says is true. This will not last. Have faith. Do not give up. Brighter days, better days are ahead, where we can plan a Shalom Zachor without the bomb shelter. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami.